So welcome to the latest edition of the Culture Decoded podcast. Today we are welcoming Sir Anthony Seldon as our guest. Anthony, good morning.
Good morning.
Anthony is a difficult person to introduce and summarise. I am going to settle on polymath. Anthony's written more than 45 books and counting. It's difficult to keep track of. He has been the headmaster of three of the most influential and principal independent schools in the UK, Brighton College, Wellington College and Epsom College, where we're sitting today. Anthony has been the vice-chancellor of Buckingham University, the first private university in the UK, which your father had quite a lot to do with founding, I understand.
He did, Charlie, very much so. The sense then back in the 70s was that there needed to be, as in, well, most sectors of life, a private as well as a state-run sector or a state-financed sector, as in the case with universities. So the dream was, and it's very much to do with Margaret Thatcher, who became the first Chancellor, was that the University of Buckingham would provide an alternative model for those who didn't want to go to a state-funded university. And it was a joy to run it for 5 years.
We will come back to that. Anthony's also been he is the co-founder of Action for Happiness, co-founded the Institute for Contemporary History and was the first director, has pioneered a walk across the front lines of the Western Front in the First World War and inaugurated a Via Sacra, which is now receiving quite a lot of attention, and I think there's more to come on that. And I could go on. And so, Anthony, I think the first question in all of that, and I should say, and it's wrong of me to admit it, that Anthony has also written the authorised and referenced biographies of consecutive prime ministers over the last 25 years, from John Major in 97 to Boris Johnson most recently. Although I think you have your work cut out, even at the rate at which you write books, to keep track of the latest prime ministerial changes. So the first question I'd like to start off with, Anthony, is there a theme that draws all those things together? Or is it the result of an expanding mind?
Well, I think, Charlie, that it's very hard for, well, maybe listeners will be different, but I think it's very hard to be able to understand one's own life. I mean, one's own life happens, and then one rationalizes about it after it's over in the twilight years, perhaps. But, you know, we say things about our lives, but often they're only partially true, or they're what we want to think is true about our lives. To be honest, I have no idea why my life has been as it is. It hasn't always been easy personally and professionally, but it's been huge fun, and I've been very privileged. You know, I was born into a privileged home and went to a private school. It was very easy for me then to go on to a top uni, and things have just come my way. But I don't know if there's a pattern behind it, other than energy and a sense of insecurity, a sense of never feeling good enough, and that drives one on to want to do new things.
I want to revisit that point around energy and drive a little bit later on. But let's start with education then, as a stopping point. We're sitting in the headmaster's study of Epsom College, first week of a new term. You make the headlines constantly, but you made the headlines on a number of occasions, particularly introducing a new approach to education through what you did initially at Brighton College and then at Wellington College, around a more personalised approach to education, one which emphasised not only academic learning, but also well-being, and embrace the 8 intelligences and innovations coming out of the US like Harkness tables. Can you talk a little bit about how you view education? And I know that's a very broad question, but what have you been trying to do in education over the last 20, 25 years or so? Because it seems sometimes that you're trying to revolutionize a sector, which doesn't always want to be revolutionized, but introducing new things at a dizzying pace. So I'd love to hear more about that from a thematic perspective. We'll talk about the individual schools in a bit.
So the word education means to lead out, and what is being led out, ideally, are the potentialities that lie within every child. Now, the truth is that schools do that very badly, that people have underdeveloped aptitudes, intelligences within them that will remain dormant or underdeveloped for the rest of their lives. That can lead to depression, frustration. It can lead to a suboptimal life. And our schools are much better at finding out what young people can't do than what they can do. 1/3 of them have failed. They're told that they are failures because they haven't got the requisite number of GCSE passes. Surprise, surprise, those 1/3 come disproportionately from those with learning difficulties, those from difficult backgrounds, socioeconomic groups, schools which are low performing. So we are rendering, our marvelous education system is rendering, telling those people who are already have life hard that they are failures. It's not the young people who failed, it is the system that is failing them, because it hasn't found what young people can do. A good school, a good parent, helps that child to find out what they want to do and what they want to be in life. And it nurtures, identifies, encourages, and develops that innate talent. And that's what a good school should be doing. And that is a theme which also lies behind happiness and well-being, and a sense of wanting to get up in the morning and to be excited about what the day brings in store.
On this podcast, I like to try and draw parallels or make connections. And there's an inherent tension in any institution which seeks standardization. And it's not just schools, it's any sort of institution. And actually needs it in order to achieve things at scale, and the individualization, which always creates tension. What are some of the challenges of that truly individualized approach? Because a lot of schools and organizations talk in that way. Very few manage to achieve it. So where are the tensions in that need for institutional standardization for scale and the individualization of experience and fulfillment?
So mass anything is always a homogenization and runs against individuality and initiative and creativity. And the school system is worthy and good people who are in the Department for Education and in local government and in Ofsted, the body that oversees schools. It's different in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, but equivalents. And they are looking primarily at what is measurable. What can we measure? What can we compare? So that is exam results. Now, and it is the school performance according to metrics that Ofsted has, which of course can be disaster and end in suicide, as was the case with Ruth Perry, the head teacher who took her life after an Ofsted inspection. It is a demeaning process, and the education system should allow much more initiative and autonomy and space. But there's so much mistrust of the teaching profession, of heads, that the state feels this need to impose a dead, dull hand of uniformity. So running a school now, so I'm running Epsom College, which I took over after the previous head, whose room we're sitting in, had tragically her life ended. We operate under a regime which runs against creativity, imagination, because we have to meet requirements for exams and for other specifications that the government puts forward. It's often about minimum standards. It's all based on a sense of fear, a sense of mistrust. It doesn't allow for imagination, creativity. It doesn't release energy. It often is suppressing energy in young people, which is why so many young people leave school resentful of a system that should be, every day of that institution should be there for them and designed to allow them to discover what they want to do in life and to be rewarded for successfully following those pathways. So the system doesn't help, and those schools which try to innovate can be slapped down either by government, but sometimes by parents who think this is odd and they don't want that, and they don't really know themselves maybe what they do want, but they naturally are concerned about their children's job prospects. And anything that can be seen to be not towing the line can be suspicious. And so parents can be a very conservative force. So can the teaching profession. I don't think teaching unions have been nearly as supportive as they could have been in the development of equality and imaginative leadership, teaching, headship. There are many forces, many more forces tending towards a dull norm than actually ones which liberate the human spirit.
You talk there about the barriers and the difficulties of supervision and measurement, and yet over the four educational institutions I mentioned, Brighton, Wellington, Buckingham and Epsom, and albeit your tenure here at Epsom has been much shorter, you've achieved remarkable turnarounds, particularly at Brighton and Wellington, 10-year stints in charge of those organisations. I'm quite interested in the 10-year tenure being we interviewed Tamara Rocco for our previous episode, who had 10 years in charge of the English National Ballet. And while she was able to achieve great things in the early years, a sustainable transformation really does take 10 years. So I'm interested in what you've just said about the difficulties of creating innovative thinking and creativity into these establishments in terms of what you actually achieved at Brighton and Wellington and then further at Buckingham and now at Epsom. Because the changes there have been real and have been sustained. So talk a little bit about your experience of those in charge of those organisations.
So I think 8 to 10 years in almost any job is enough. I think it is hard to keep your drive and imagination. I think it's very easy to then start defending what it is that you have done, and not to have that creative zest and sense of edgy insecurity which you need to drive an organisation forward. With prime ministers who, in the book called Impossible Office, which surveys all 57, which was also the BBC series on Radio 4 I did about the prime minister, there, the surprise, the average length of successful prime ministers is about 8 to 10 years. Hard to achieve, make a mark if you've been there for less than 5 or 6 years. All the top tier have been there for at least that long. And those who overstay the welcome, I mean, Thatcher was already past her sell-by date. Arguably, Blair was, who I don't put in as a top tier prime minister, but in most jobs, I think that is the case. And so there are reasons why that is true. At those particular schools, I think it was right. I think I was much less good in my last 3 years than I was earlier on. A leader is so important in organizations. A leader is a releaser. And that's what great leaders do. They release the talent and potential of others and of the organization. They understand intuitively what the organization is and what the market opportunity is for that organization. And they release the talents of the people who are going to be doing the work to then achieve that. So, Keir Starmer coming up, the likely prime minister, if he does the job well, he will have assessed what is the best I can be. He will spool back from 10 years forward and think, what are the changes I could have made? What are the problems that are going to come up that will knock me away from that? He'll have a clear, intuitive understanding map in his head. Always one of Stephen Covey's best habits, by this brilliant book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but begin with the end. I mean, why do we need all this nonsense? 25 years of management, ghastly, grim speak that we've had since, when he has summed it up so clearly. One of his best points is begin with the end in mind. What is it that you are actually wanting to do?
Have you sent him a copy of The Impossible Office?
Stephen Covey?
No, as Keir Starmer.
He, I'm sure, has read it all. Why would I deprive myself of £7.49? Actually, I have no idea. I have no idea. Well, I have no idea what the cost of milk is, which is a terrible confession. But I have no idea what the profits from the books I've written for years have gone to charity. So I have no idea. I think he would be a better prime minister if he read it. That's not because it's my book at all. It's because it distills the wisdom. Or to put it another way, he would, in a much more truthful way, he would be a much better prime minister for studying history. They come in, they know nothing. They're surrounded by know-nothing advisors who think they can make it all up. They're united on believing that their predecessor was useless. I mean, they'll think Blair thought Major was useless, Brown thought Blair was useless, Cameron thought Brown was useless, May thought Cameron was useless, and Boris Johnson thought that Theresa May was useless. They all think their predecessor is useless. They don't understand. They are so rich, boiling in arrogance. So I think the serious point is humility, learning from history. The wise leaders in any organization are coming in with a sense of what that historical arc is, what will the architecture of their leadership be, and learning what the historic opportunity is, and understanding the history of that office, of the company, the job, and what optimal job role that they might fulfill. That's good sense. That's good judgment.
You mentioned the role of a leader as a releaser. I find that fascinating and very appealing. I've not heard it framed in that way before. And we'll come to the political leadership discussion in just a second. But I'd like to linger a little over the role as a leader, as a releaser, particularly in transformation, in turnarounds, because there will be lessons across beyond schools and education. Can you talk a little bit more about what and how when you talk about releaser? So what do you really mean? What does that look like? And what are the key levers that you put into action?
So in the field of positive psychology, there's a lot of work about the way that leadership has an impact on the led. And many leaders, many teachers, listeners will remember their own careers, are repressive. Many parents are repressive. They're afraid of what their children might do. Heads are afraid of making mistakes or falling foul of their governors. They repress and are oppressive with the staff. The staff, in turn, are oppressive with the kids. The kids, in turn, are oppressive on their dogs at home. I don't know. Whoever, or will try beating up other kids and bullying other kids. The alternative model of that is that you're not a repressor, you are a releaser. You release the inner talent, as I was talking about, the inner intelligences. And you'll have heard this before, Charlie, but there is an American called Howard Gardner at Harvard who talks about the multiple intelligences that we have within us, which go way, way, way beyond cognitive intelligence, which is what's measured mostly by schools. And he says, you've heard this before yourself, don't ask how intelligent a child is, ask rather, how is the child intelligent? And so every child, therefore, has intelligence. The job of a school is to discover, nurture, as we were talking about. The job of a leader is to know the strengths of the people for whom they're responsible and maximize those strengths. It's a strength-based approach. Many leaders maintain their power and position by not just fear, but by being dismissive of their staff. Finding out, it's very easy to find out there are 3 people in this room, I can work out what your vulnerable positions are, and I can use my power to diminish you and deplete you as people. And that's what leaders can do. But most successful leaders do precisely the opposite. They intuitively understand not people's vulnerabilities, but their strengths. They are using the strength-based model approach, which gives it a ridiculous psychological term, but they're just being good human beings. Good parents are about helping your child feel good about themselves and release that energy. You know what it's like when it's the equivalent of we're feeling a bit low, and somebody in the days when one was allowed to touch colleagues just touches you on the shoulder, and you just feel completely different. How can we find those moments whereby we are making people around us feel good about themselves? The great job of a head where I now am, my biggest job is smiling at kids. You smile at a kid and you particularly smile at kids who, well, you can smile at all kids for all kinds of different reasons. For one reason, which is to help them feel good about themselves, but but they'll respond in different ways. Some will feel that will be dealing with a lot in their life. Some will be feeling unloved by the school. Some will be all the myriad of different things that are going on. It releases them. That leaders, a teacher is a leader of the class. A head of a school is a leader of the staff, as well as more than just the staff. In an organization, you may have 10 direct reports, 7, 12. The biggest single factor on their performance will be the attitude that the leader has towards them. And people who one says are due to be sacked, often it is because they've so ingested a model of failure from disapproving looks by the boss that indeed they then become not very good at all. I mean, look, you go into a class And you can achieve incredible things with the kids through expectation theory if you, and again, that's just another ridiculous word, just by letting them know that you can do well. I mean, there's a famous story about, see if I can say this very quickly. Teaching new to a school, there was a head of maths, 10 classes in each year group. She came in and she thought she was teaching class number the fifth in this setted business. And when the exams came out at the end, they did much better than the class that was setted as the fourth ableist. And the head of the department was furious about why they'd done so well at their GCSE. And it came out, she said, how could that happen? You were teaching set 5. And she said, I thought I was teaching set 3. In other words, she was teaching them as if they were set 3. How we treat people predicts how they are going to perform. And if we imagine that they can do very well, they're much more likely to do very well. And we can read that across through multiple work, but not just work, social situations as well. So you asked about releasing talent. That's just given you some points, maybe.
That's fascinating. And so many, as you say, so many read across beyond education. Many organizations have so much interference rather than a fulfilled potential. Let's use that as a rather imperfect transference into political leadership, because you are, if not the, then certainly for one of the foremost authorities on prime ministers in the UK in recent times. You've written The Impossible Office as a sort of summary of prime ministerial abilities and otherwise, and you have bemoaned publicly the paucity of not only longevity but impact and talent at the top office in political leadership. Could you say a few words around how you've seen changes in political leadership over the last 10, 20 years, how you think that's reflected society? And you've already talked about some of the things that you think the new Prime Minister should be looking at. But the so what from it? So what needs to happen, or indeed what needs to change?
So I think 3 changes, just to highlight those. One would be the age of people coming in. So in David Cameron and in Tony Blair, we had 2 people coming in their early 40s, which was the youngest for 200 years. And but at the same time and under the same point, they were not there. Those 2 did 10 and 6 years respectively, but their successors, Theresa May did 3, Boris Johnson did 3 years, and Liz Truss, about whom I'm now writing, did 49 days. And so I think the first point would be, age, but shortness of service also. And the second would be that they're much more driven by what focus groups are saying and much less by innate principles. And Churchill didn't have focus groups, neither did Clement Attlee, neither did Lloyd George, who were 3 of the great prime ministers of last century. I say, rightly or wrongly, that 9 of the 57 prime ministers were top tier. Those 3 were all top tier prime ministers. And the new generation of special advisors and focus group specialists and pollsters coming in around the prime minister makes it into a consumer form of politics rather than a conviction or principle-led politics. And it hasn't made for long-term systemic change. So here we are in mid...
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to butt in, but it's what comes first? The loss of trust and belief and admiration of our institutions, or a reactive consumer-based political class? Because they're linked.
Well, of course they are. I mean, and I think that they both play off each other. we often hear when politics goes well, which people saying, well, they don't agree with that, but they respect the decision that was taken. I mean, that can happen in a school. It can happen in any community. And that means the person will be acting off a principle that they respect it because they can see that it fits in to a whole grain sense of what that person is said to stand for. With Boris Johnson, there was a principle, one consistent reference point in Boris Johnson's premiership for 3 years, but also his life, and that principle was Boris Johnson and what was in his interest. So does Britain come in or out of the European community, European Union? What matters there for Boris Johnson was Boris Johnson's career prospects. So Britain came out, for better or worse, significantly because of Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, that was part of a package with Dominic Cummings. If that hadn't come together, Britain would still be in the EU, for better or worse. But the principal point for, Boris Johnson didn't really understand the details of trade and single markets and Northern Ireland protocols. He didn't. Why would he want to get into the detail of all that? He just thought it would suit him to actually lead, to head up vote leave. So principles matter. That's why we should be teaching character in schools. We don't teach character, we teach exams. We teach personality, not character. And so it's hard to trust somebody where you can't see what the principles are. I think a decline of faith has played a part in it, and the decline of confidence of many of those people who do have faith has played a part in it too. But anything that's consistent and principled is important. And then I think the other final change with leadership at the moment, the shortness of office doesn't allow you enough time to do things. The fact that the focus groups come in is the reactivity to the news, which again makes a short-term precedent. Now, Churchill did have the first editions of the newspapers delivered to Downing Street before he went to bed. But that wasn't why he decided to not make a settlement with France and to hold out against Hitler in May 1940 or the rest of his policies. So you need to be aware of what people are saying. I mean, Liz Truss, really interestingly, forbade all newspapers in Downing Street or near her desk in Downing Street. She wanted other people to read them. She didn't want to read them herself. Why? Because she didn't want to know the bad stuff. I mean, you've got to be aware as a leader always of what people are saying about you, but you can't make that the reason for choosing A over B. You have to. So the prioritization of media, short-term media, 24-hour news cycle, reactive policies, something's happened, you immediately feel you've got to react. And of course, any number of prime ministers have people like Alistair Campbell around them who are saying, instant rebuttal. Where's the philosophy? Where's the compassion? Where's the good nature in that kind of media obsession, beating other people? Another point, by the way, that Stephen Covey talks about is think win-win. If you smash anybody, that person will always come back at you. Why did Britain get in? Why was there a Second World War? Because Germany was humiliated after the First World War. You humiliate anybody, you smash anybody, you knock anybody down, and that engenders resentment, and that is an energy, a form of energy that will come back and hit you. That's what's happening in Israel at the moment.
And indeed Ukraine.
And in Ukraine. I mean, these are big topics which are just fleeting effort.
These are all sorts of off-ramps that we could, I'm tempted to take, but won't. Using Stephen Covey then...
I'm partly teasing you there, Charlie, by just flitting them in.
Knowing
that your time pressure means you're going to have to move on.
Yes. Stephen, one of other principles of Stephen Covey was sharpen the saw. So if I use that as a rather clumsy link, and I know that you're less comfortable talking about yourself as you are about the topics we've just been covering. But the most powerful interpretation that most people have of you is not personal ambition, but ambition for the institutions that you either comment on or indeed lead. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the drive, the energy, the insecurity that you mentioned at the intro, about really what drives you and how does that manifest for good and sometimes maybe not for good.
Energy, I think, is a wonderful quality when we have it. And I think that the positive psychology approach allows one to nourish it and maximize it. That saying, at the age of 40, anyone over the age of 40 owns their face, deserves the face. Now you try to have a very nice open face. But you see people who are looking haggard. I mean, I was in Sarajevo with Buckingham a couple of years ago and giving degrees, and there the faces look very, very anxious and haggard because they've had a terrible time. So, of course, external factors matter, but not everybody did look. Some looked joyful. How much light is there in people's eyes? How much energy is radiated? We have a choice. We choose. We are the authors of our own biographies. We have a choice. And even if for all the outrageous issues that befall us, the people with real nobility are those who overcome adversity and prevail in the face of it. It's also true, by the way, of organizations. And so I've certainly tried to manage that energy myself. All my life, I have meditated twice a day, done yoga twice a day for most of my life, and walk a lot. I mean, this meeting is sitting down, but most of my meetings are walking. And why would we want to have meetings in stuffy rooms? I mean, get board meetings out of sitting around in stuffy rooms and get people parading around. The meeting will last half the length and you'll probably get to the right conclusions much quicker anyway, better conclusions. And he says provocatively. And in terms of my own life, I think there is quite a lot of ego in what I do. And I'm trying to please my parents, even though they are dead. I'm trying to, tragically, 10 years ago, I'm trying to think of my children. Of course there's ego. Anyone who says that there is no ego has ego. Itself saying it is an egocentric thing. But also my passion, my life kind of becomes that organization. When I was at Brighton College, which had almighty problems when I went into it, principally of numbers and revenue, and the fact the government was taking away a scheme that was propping up 20% of our numbers, called the Government Assisted Places Scheme, and more. It was almost a life and death experience that organization flourished and succeeded. So I think there's always an element of the leaders that their ego becomes the organization. And, and we see that the bad sense of that is it's then hard to leave it. People become over attached. I mean, I always do worry about alumni who want to be associated with their old schools because they somehow need to be cutting themselves off, and people who become overly identified with their one organization. Actually, we should be identifying with the whole of life. I worry about people who identify too much with their own gender or their own faith group or racial group, or the best in humanity see themselves as equally at one with everybody, regardless of whoever they are, wherever they come from. So you can over particularize. I think leaders need to particularize around what they are leading, but also they need to then cut off and remember that we are part of one world, one community, and national leaders go wrong. Look at Netanyahu at the moment. When you forget, look at Putin, look at so many leaders you can look at in the world today. The greatest have a sense of something beyond their own particular country. That's why nationalistic leaders are I think, always dangerous, and often the way that they will get their power base is by identifying enemies within the nation or outside around who they can gain support with short-term promises that never they've vamoosed by the time people realise that those promises are just thin air. I mean, it's the heroes in life are the bridge builders. They're the people who see beyond the limits of one organisation, one group, and I think that's what's driving me now to make this walk across Europe. So I'm already in Switzerland. I'm now doing the second part. That was the Western Front Way book, creating that path of peace. Now the path of peace is going from Switzerland, where I ended it, out to Auschwitz, which is part 2, which is another 1,000 kilometres, up through the Rhine, and then through Bavaria, and then along the Danube, the Carpathian Mountains, Czechoslovakia, up into Poland. And then if I do succeed, from there I want to walk through Lvov all the way to the Ukraine front line, which would be the third walk. But, we all have to find, Charlie, our song. The great American Thoreau talked about how most people go to their grave with their song still inside them. Everyone listening to this podcast, if you're still there, hello, should be trying to discover their song. What is their song? What uniquely are you on earth to do? That's part of education, but we cannot always look to other people. We have to look to ourselves to provide it. What is our unique song in life?
And that for you now is bridge building, is it?
Most definitely. I think it always was. I mean, when I was at Brighton College, always I was trying to build bridges with the local state schools and form partnerships, aware of the privilege and the advantage. Wellington Academy was about trying to build bridges. We can't just, we can't just let separation grow. The truth, the life comes from the building of bridges and the realization of the commonality of humanity. And energy rather than the particularization of it.
I'm very glad you brought Henry through into it. I can't finish this interview without asking about the relationship between ambition or fulfillment of that song that you talk about and the perception of barriers. And I wonder whether you don't even see them in the pursuit of that outcome. But you've always struck me as someone who paints on a bigger canvas than the normal person, doesn't see limitations. When you wanted to do a celebration, for instance, at Wellington College, well, why wouldn't you hire out the Albert Hall in order to do that? And if you wanted to connect people, then you'll walk across Europe in order to commemorate the Western Front and inaugurate a new walking path. Well, do you think about barriers, or do you simply not see them?
I think everyone has to try to be like themselves and to find their truest self. It's good what we're trying to do, I think, in schools, or should be trying to do rather, is to help everybody understand who they are, what they love about life, what they want to do in life, what their particular gifts and talents are. for me, I think I'm still looking. Barriers. I mean, I was naughty when I was at school. I was really bad, and I think I've I mean, as part of me is a fighter against convention and status quo. So why am I then running a public school? Well, answer is I don't really know, but within it, I've certainly tried to push barriers as hard as I can within that, and to build across where I could see that one could do it. And so there is that sense of frustration with the dull status quo, and a sense of wanting to be freer and to liberate, and always the people I found most difficult are the grey, dull bureaucrats and the heartless, soulless, mirthless people who can take over whole countries and take over institutions and have neither life nor love nor compassion nor creativity nor magic in them. And so, yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm partly fighting. I'm partly still a teenager, Charlie, really. Aren't we all? And at heart, and struggling for self-actualization and efficacy. But it's fun, and the voyage is really only just beginning.
Anthony, thank you. It was fascinating. We should finish there. You've been very generous with your time. My final question, and I haven't pre-warned you about this, so I expect it to come quite spontaneously, but we're asking each of our podcast guests to identify a song that best they relate to, that best describes their journey as a leader and as a person. What would be your song?
Well, that is difficult because there are so many songs that I love. So I'm going to go for Let It Be, because it's been with me all my life. It came out when I was a teenager, and it is beautifully composed and beautifully sung. And the message of Let It Be is essentially a wonderful and powerful message. But, you know, you've said I'm a rule breaker, so I'm going to break your rule, and I would go for the second verse of I Vow to Thee, My Country, which is written by a former British ambassador to America called Cecil Spring Rice, and the music obviously by Holst. And that second verse, when it talks about another country I heard of long ago, that sense of mystery that is encapsulated in those words, that there is this place of peace that is beyond, that we somehow, in our cloudy, misty past, we know it in our deepest bones. I think that also, so there you are, I've given you only half, because it's got to 2 verse, so I'm going for 1.5. I'm not a full rule breaker.
You've stuck it in.
I've stuck it in, and you couldn't do anything to stop me.
We will add that to the playlist. Anthony Seldon, thank you very much indeed. Absolutely fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
And thanks, team.
Thank you.